Mr. MacDonald, President Graham-Shantz, thank you. Thank you for your opening remarks. I'm Bijan Ahmadi, Executive Director and CEO of the Canada-China Business Council. As our keynote speakers have well noted, we gather at a pivotal moment, a turning point, as Prime Minister Carney has called it, in Canada-China relations. A moment marked by renewed optimism, growing momentum, and the promise of a more constructive and forward-looking economic partnership between our two countries. The CCBC membership, and indeed the broader Canada-China economic relationship, spans a wide range of sectors and industries on both sides. This diversity truly reflects the depth of our economic complementarity, from education and minerals to agri-food, consumer products, energy, technology, financial services, and much more. At this year's forum, as we are in this moment of recalibration and re-engagement in bilateral ties, we have deliberately designed the program, the 3 upcoming panel discussions, and our 2 business missions this year, the Agri-Food and Education missions, to highlight some of the key sectors and industries that have long served as pillars of the Canada-China economic relationship and that continue to hold tremendous potential for future growth. Our first panel discussion is titled Advancing Canada-China Agri-Food Engagement. This panel is sponsored generously by Export Development Canada, EDC. We're grateful for their support and long-standing partnership with CCBC. We're especially pleased to have with us today Alison Nankivell, President and CEO of EDC. I would like to invite Alison to join us on stage to open the Agri-Food session. Please join me in welcoming Alison Nankivell.
女士们、先生们，早上好。It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Alison Nankivell, as Bijan said, President and CEO of Export Development Canada, or EDC for short. 我是南爱利加拿大出口发展公司的总裁兼首席执行官。It's a pleasure, as I said, to be back in Beijing because I am here after many years of being away and having spent much of my time earlier in my career with EDC here, but also such a pleasure to be here to see so many great companies and trade ecosystem partners who have such an important mission of expanding our trade footprint on behalf of Canada. For those of you who are maybe less familiar with EDC, we're Canada's export credit agency. Our mandate is to grow Canada's international trade and investment, and we've been delivering on this mission for over 80 years. EDC supports investors, exporters, and companies who need knowledge and connections to go into international markets. We leverage our 25 representations around the world, including 2 here in China, to help facilitate foreign market expansion for our customers. 25 years ago, actually, that's a long time, I was here. I worked as EDC's Greater China Chief Representative, and over the course of my career with EDC and others, I had the chance to spend 11 years in Beijing. That experience gave me a deep sense of the incredible potential for trade between our 2 countries, which brings me, of course, to the topic of today's panel, Advancing Canada-China Agri-Food Engagement. And I should start here by acknowledging the challenges that some of our speakers have already spoke about. There are high tariffs, there's trade uncertainty, painful barriers to growth, but in recent weeks, as we've seen, there's a lot of cause for optimism as well. Leaders for both countries have had constructive dialogue, and the first such engagement since 2018, the meeting between Prime Minister Carney and President Xi on October 31st, Agri-Food was singled out as the trade issue to address. So this represents a significant step in improving bilateral relations. And even against this challenging geopolitical backdrop, the opportunity for agri-food growth in China still remains significant. This is Canada's, as been said, second largest export market, purchasing approximately 30 billion in Canadian goods annually. Approximately 1/3 of those exports are agri-food, primarily canola, peas, lentils, wheat, seafood, and pork. This accounts for 10% of Canada's global agri-food exports, a significant proportion. For EDC's part, in 2024, we facilitated 1.24 billion in agri-food business for China, supporting more than 130 companies. This equates to a strong foothold in the China market, from which we can continue to grow our exports and our investment. There are also dynamics at play that could propel mutually beneficial trade relationships. China's 2025 #1 central document, for example, which serves as a policy directive, identifies food security as a top priority. It notes the Chinese government should focus on seeking stable grain supply and advancing sustainable farming. It also highlights the need for market diversification to secure supply chains for meat, dairy, and high-quality grains. Canada has those products and expertise to support China's food security goals. Then there are demographic trends that factor into this opportunity, fueled by the middle class growth, increasing consumer spending, and rapid urbanization. China's food and beverage market stands as one of the largest and fastest growing globally. Chinese consumers are becoming more health conscious, developing more sophisticated tastes that favor premium offerings like organic, low sugar, and functional foods. Here again, Canada can meet these emerging demands with a global reputation for quality, as the Minister said, along with premium, safe, and sustainable food that Chinese consumers are seeking out. Now, I believe that's done enough to articulate the challenges and, of course, the opportunities that we see in building Canada's agri-food sector presence here. So let's transfer it over to the panel for discussion. And I'd like to call up our esteemed moderator, the Honourable Scott Brison, Vice Chair of BMO Wealth. Scott, over to you.
Welcome to the Canada-China Business Council first session today on food, and it's an extraordinarily important one. Canada has been there from the beginning of the remarkable miracle of China's development in many ways. And if you look at support for China in terms of grain, going back to Diefenbaker and of course, but then in 1970, it was Canada and the leadership of Prime Minister Trudeau opening up relations with post-revolution China, followed by President Nixon and Henry Kissinger in the US in 1972, that really started what has become the most remarkable economic story of our lifetimes and advancement of human rights, and that is China's ability to develop and bring 1 billion people from poverty into the middle class. And as that happens, people need to eat good food. And today, here with us, I would welcome to the stage our three esteemed Canadian panelists who bring from a different perspective and different regions some of the examples of these opportunities and how Canada is as well positioned and perhaps better positioned than just about anybody to be China's trusted source for food and nutritional innovation. I'd like to welcome up, first of all, from my home province, the Honourable Kent Smith, Minister of Agriculture for the beautiful province of Nova Scotia. Fisheries and aquaculture. Sorry, I'm from the Annapolis Valley. We always put the farmers first down there. We're from Nova Scotia. We're used to sharing things there. Welcome, Minister Smith. And I'd also like to welcome Bill Grewal, who's Deputy Minister of Agriculture for Saskatchewan. There's Bill. Thank you, Bill. And next, Arnold Drung from Conestoga Meats. Welcome. Conestoga Meats is a leading producer of protein, pork, Canada. And next, Greg Sherwick, who's president or chair and president of Pulse Canada. Greg, please join us. welcome, and forgive me, I'm going to start with my home province. We are parochial down east. But Minister Smith, seafood and aquaculture are big business for Nova Scotia and for Atlantic Canada. China is a huge market for high-quality protein, and seafood and aquaculture is a growing part of that. Who do you view as the competitors, other jurisdictions, countries, and spaces, and how is Nova Scotia positioning itself as in the pole position as China's most trusted provider of premium seafood and aquaculture?
Thank you very much. Still okay to call you Minister? Thank you, Minister.
We had, well, it never sounds bad.
Certainly, thank you for the question, and I want to say a big thank you to start off to the CCBC for putting together today's events for everyone to make sure that we all get to network and learn a little bit as we go. So first part of your question, who's our biggest competitor? Well, it's tough to compete with the best, right? So our seafood is renowned worldwide as safe, sustainable, nutritious. 85% of it is MSC certified. The meetings that we had in Qingdao, we heard over and over again that in spite of the tariffs, there is still solid demand for our product. And then to maintain our position and increase our brand share, we found that it was really, really vital for those companies that invested in coming to the Qingdao show and maintaining those relationships. Because again, we had 8 or 10 meetings with really important importers of Nova Scotian seafood, and every single one of them said that demand is still solid, and that the only thing that's slowing them down from buying a little bit more product is the tariffs, and they all are excited for the meeting that Prime Minister Carney and President Xi had last week, and I know that everyone here shares the optimism that hopefully we can lift those barriers sooner rather than later and move some more Nova Scotian and Canadian product from home to here.
Mr. Gruhl, welcome, and your Premier Mo, had a recent trip to China, and he partnered with Cody Blois, Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister. Saskatchewan Agri-Food is obviously an important sector for Canada, and the Chinese market has had some, of course, big opportunities, but risks as well. What kind of partnerships do you believe are on the horizon in terms of research and technology development that might integrate China and Saskatchewan more closely in a working relationship to help prevent some of the impacts or make us a little bit more insulated from some of these tariffs on canola and other areas in the future?
Yeah, great. Thank you for that. And it was great to see Parliamentary Secretary Blois come from your previous riding at King's Hants, and it's great to see Nova Scotia here supporting Canadian agriculture in that. You know, I think about maybe Canada's or Saskatchewan, maybe I'll talk about that perspective. The relationship here with China kind of in 3 veins. One is kind of the resource that we have in terms of agricultural land and our producers. You know, we've got 47% of Canada's farmland. We produce, on average, 35 million metric tons of crop production. That's almost a third of all crop output for Canada. And so we do have a resource that we can lean on. Secondly is kind of the current situation, the export value and the potential. Alison, in her opening remarks, mentioned the volume of trade that we do in agri-food between Canada and China. A significant portion of that is from Saskatchewan. Canola oil, canola meal, canola seed, non-durum wheat, pulses, very important market for us. And then I think about the potential, and maybe that's where I'll address a bit of the innovation side. But On the potential side, we've been investing in agricultural innovation in Saskatchewan for a long time. We produce some of the most sustainable crops in the world, lowest carbon footprint crops in the world. We're innovating on new varieties to meet market demands and needs of the future. We're investing in processing technology to produce new ingredients that meet changing demands for consumers on a global basis and also here in China. And just investing in production to make sure that we've got a great base of commodities that we can export. Harvest just wrapped up in Saskatchewan. We are looking at about a 37 million metric ton harvest, which is higher than our 10-year average, and working toward a goal of 45 million metric tons. And maybe that takes me to my last point, which is the need to evolve and change and grow with China as strategic partners, because we're not going to slow down in terms of the innovation, the investment, the production, and so we'd like to grow with China. I'm hearing words today from Minister MacDonald and Alison around the spirit of partnership, deepening engagement, renewed optimism. This is a pivotal time. I think we'd agree with all of that, and we'll be looking to make investments in innovation and research to further and deepen what I think is a really important long-term strategic partnership.
Thank you very much, Mr. Drung. Or actually, Mr. Drung's next. But on Conestoga meat, Arnold, you have in the past, there have been challenges, tariff issues in the past that haven't played out more recently, but China has become a massive market for your for protein and for pork. I guess it's the largest market in the world. How do you see Canada as the trusted partner in Conestoga meat as a leading Canadian exporter of pork? And do you see trends? Also, are there trends now that people in the audience may not be aware of in terms of Chinese demand, and how are they reflected in your offerings?
Yeah, thanks very much. We're glad to be in the Chinese market, the world's largest consumers of pork. Just by order of scale, China produces somewhere in the order of 650 million hogs a year. In Canada, we process about 20 million. So it's wonderful to have a market of this size. As an industry, we've been in China for in the order of 20 plus years. Our company well over 15, and we've continued to evolve over that time as the Chinese market has evolved. With respect to consumer trends, it's already been mentioned, there's a rising middle class, there's a rising affluence, and there's continued growing demand for safe and wholesome food. And Canada can provide that, the pork sector can provide that. We've been doing that already, as I said, for many years, and we continue to work with our partners, both here in China, our trade partners, as well as from an industry perspective with the government regulatory bodies. Meat is the most regulated of all food commodities, and our Canadian Food Inspection Agency has good relationships with their Chinese counterparts and continues to work with them to help increase access and to grow the business overall. Our volume as an industry continues to grow in China on the pork side. We're hoping that with beef that access will also be restored in the coming months, but Canada has great product to provide, and we look forward to continuing to grow that business.
How is the regulatory cooperation between the Chinese and the Canadian entities? Are you seeing progress being made?
Yes, I think we've had very good relationships over time. Obviously, there's been geopolitical and other issues that have caused things maybe to ebb and flow, but I would say at the base level, there is good cooperation, and ultimately it's the same objective for everyone, Canadian or Chinese, to ensure that there's good, wholesome, safe product coming to market that consumers can enjoy. You know, we've come to be able in Canada to take it for granted that our food supply is top quality, and we don't worry about anything to deal with food. And we're transitioning, I would say, that out to the world, that same level of assurance that other countries can be assured of our Canadian top quality, and that's certainly the case here too.
Thank you. Greg, the Canadian pulse sector is a global model for sustainable high-protein food production. Where does China fit into your 25 by 2025 plan as an industry?
So I would say that China is a perfect example of what we were aiming to achieve when we established the 25 by 2025 strategy. And just for context, that was an industry directive that was settled on in 2017. So it was forward-looking back then, and it was focused on diversification. And what we meant by 25 by 2025 was 25% of our productive capacity would move into new uses and new demand areas by the year 2025. Now, I say that China was a perfect example of what we were aiming to achieve because the work on diversification for our industry extends back 20 years, 25 years if I was to go back to the beginnings. But one of the very first initiatives that I worked on when I entered the workforce was a project focused on China for the pulse industry. And it was focused at that time on developing the Chinese market for feed, for peas in use as a feed ingredient. Now, there were many angles to that particular initiative. We were looking at tariff reduction so that we could compete effectively with corn and soy. There was a need to establish trials, feeding trials across this country to get companies familiar with using this new ingredient, build confidence in using this ingredient. But that work took place over the course of many years. And as we were doing that work, we were also working with another segment of the industry here that was importing very small quantities in containers of peas for the vermicelli noodle manufacturing industry in the province of Shandong. That industry was extracting starch from our yellow peas and using them in the production of noodles. But the protein at that point was a waste byproduct. So when we began working with the feed industry in China, there was a growing recognition that the protein fraction actually had a lot of value. And over time, of course, they extracted maximum value from that protein of the pea and built what is now the world's largest supercluster of protein fractionation facilities right in the province of Shandong. So I tell you this story because it's part and parcel of a diversification initiative that's taken 25 years. So we now sell yellow peas to a fractionation industry that extracts protein to make high-value protein isolate. They extract starch to make noodles that are consumed widely here in China. We sell peas into the food industry. We sell peas into the pigeon meat industry, and we sell peas into the livestock sector for use in hog rations as well as aquaculture. So it's a fully diversified market for us and has become that market over the course of quite a few years, and with a lot of investment from Canada along with our partners in China. And I'll leave you with the idea that this is now the world's largest market for yellow peas. Over the course of the last 10 years, it has become the world's largest market, and Canada has shipped $4 billion worth of peas here over the last 5 years.
So your experience in China and the research and development that has been spawned by that has actually had an impact on pivoting your industry globally, in a sense. That experience with China has synergized some more fundamental changes for the pulse industry.
Absolutely. I think if you trace this industry in Canada back to its origins, it really is a producer of a basic staple source of protein for the developing world. We're shipping lentils and peas to countries like India and throughout the Indian subcontinent and Asia and Latin America. China, however, was we first recognized that we're not just a supplier of whole commodities to the developing world, we're also a supplier of an ingredient. And I'll get into that a little bit later, but it's a major shift in terms of mindset for the Canadian industry to move away from supplying commodities to the developing world to supplying food ingredients to a very sophisticated food manufacturing sector.
Minister Smith, Clearwater Foods, proud Nova Scotian company, provided the lobster for the grand opening of the Macau Convention Center. I forget how many years ago. That's been a while, but they wanted the best. It was Clearwater Foods, and I think Clearwater Foods also gives us an opportunity to talk about the partnership between Premium Brands, one of Canada's most successful food companies, and the Member 2 First Nation, because as part of economic reconciliation, examples where effectively the Chinese market is part of the success of a progressive economic and social advancement of Indigenous people in Canada. They were at Qingdao this year. So some reflection on that partnership for people here who may not be aware of it, but also what other takeaways from the seafood show would you share with the group here today?
Certainly. Thank you again, Minister, for the question. You're right. Clearwater is a very successful and storied Nova Scotian company. It started by two brothers almost 50 years ago out of the back of their vehicle on the Bedford Highway, and grew to be one of the largest seafood exporting companies in our province. And they ultimately sold not too long ago to Premium Brands International in a partnership, as you mentioned, with the First Nations group. And so that has certainly led to some strong economic prosperity for both Premium Brands International and for the Indigenous groups that they're sponsored by or supported by. They have continued to be leaders in premium quality seafood. They've made some changes to their business model recently at home, and live lobster is not something that they're pursuing as much as they had in the past. But surf clams and scallops are top on their list of exports. And in fact, at the show, when we talk about partnerships, we were lucky to be there when JD.com, a local well-known e-commerce platform, and Clearwater signed a bilateral agreement. They signed an MOU, so they will be partnering up to sell more surf clams on the JD.com platform. And the second part of your question was about the other takeaways from the show, and I'll segue into the e-commerce side of things, because it was an incredible experience for me to see and learn about how prevalent the e-commerce market is here. So we have e-commerce at home. Obviously, it's an important part of commerce overall, but we don't have it on the same scale as they do here. In fact, I was talking to a couple of the companies that we work with in Nova Scotia, and just for fun, they were in a taxi ride on their way home from an event, and they wanted to test the e-commerce system here, and so they ordered 2 of their own redfish products from an online platform, and they had 30 minutes to go on the drive back to the hotel, and they ordered 2 redfish to be delivered to the hotel, and what happened? The redfish got to the hotel before they did. So that just goes to show you how important and how vital that e-commerce is to get products to market. And the other great takeaway from the show, sticking with the online platform, was that the amount of live streaming that was taking place. So as we walked around the show and toured other booths and went from meeting to meeting, we saw dozens and dozens of companies that were currently doing an online live stream promotion, trying to highlight their product. In fact, Nova Scotia has partnered with a couple of companies in the past to do online live stream promotions, and I was asked if I would come back again in the future and do one. So I'm optimistic that the next time I come back to China, I'll get to do a live stream promotion and hopefully sell more Nova Scotian product here.
When you got back to your hotel room, were the redfish there?
It was a Nova Scotian company. I'll give them a shout out. Lewisburg Seafoods, one of our great exporters, and one of their sales representatives is a local from China. I'm not sure which province he's from. So he got on his phone when they were in the taxi on their way back to their hotel just to test out the platform and see how quickly they could order 2 of their own redfish to be delivered to their hotel.
I hope they had a kitchenette in the hotel, because there's limited things you can do with raw fish in the hotel. I mean, room service is available in some hotels as well, but I was curious about that. But that is a great story. Look, Saskatchewan and the federal government, from time to time, there's been, and I'd say this broadly, it strikes me that the mood has changed somewhat in terms of federal-provincial relations between the Prime Minister Carney's government and the previous government. How important is that, would you say, from Saskatchewan's perspective, or from Nova Scotia's perspective too, that partnership between the federal and provincial government, the hard work done by our ambassador here on the ground, but the engagement of senior ministers who are increasingly here, the Prime Minister's meeting with President Xi, are the provinces, how do you feel Saskatchewan and Nova Scotia from that perspective about the trajectory of that federal-provincial partnership and its impact on the broader Canada-China relation?
Yeah, thank you for that. And I'll preface all of these comments with, we're all after the same thing, right? We're all after, being strategic partners in trade with nations around the world. And so to drive at that and keep grounded in the fact that we're all after the same thing, I think is a really critical element that describes maybe the partnership. And so maybe to drive at the heart of your question about why is it so critically important around federal-provincial relationships and partnerships in this area. Saskatchewan, I talked a little bit about the amount of commodities and ingredients and agricultural production that we have. We're a landlocked province at the end of the day. 70% of what we produce has to be exported. And there's a lot of things that prevent that, and there's a lot of things that enhance that, and a lot of that is federal jurisdiction. So it's really critical that we've got the right partnership. And I think about issues related to market access and phytosanitary and non-tariff trade barriers. That's a really critical element that the Canadian Food Inspection Agency plays for us in discussions and negotiating market access agreements with countries around the world is critical. I think about port infrastructure and the role that the federal government plays there as well. Critically important for us, as I said, 37 million metric tons of crop production. For those of you who have not been to Saskatchewan, we're a long ways from tidewater. We need that infrastructure to move that product to port, to get it to export markets so that we can be viewed as a reliable partner. That's a really critical element that the federal government needs to play. And finally, just, the negotiation of free trade agreements. Certainly, Premier Moe, as you'd mentioned, was here not long ago, and he was very public about the role that the federal government needs to play, because at the end of the day, it's not going to be Premier Moe standing up and talking about a renewed trade relationship that has to be with the federal government. So I think that relationship's critically important for us. And like you say, it has been, it's in a very good place today. And I think, a lot of it is based on the fact that we're all keeping in mind the fact that we're after the same thing at the end of the day, which is supplying a growing market like China, being a strategic partner, making sure that we're delivering highly sustainable, highly nutritious, low carbon footprint ingredients to this market.
Thank you again, Minister, and I would echo one part of Bill's comment to say that ultimately, of course, it is the federal government that does the negotiating, as the lead negotiator, but that's not to say that the province don't play in a very important role. I will say that, Minister, I don't feel particularly important or special, but I will say being on the ground here and having the meetings that I've had and interacting with the local Chinese companies, they are incredibly thankful and incredibly supportive of us being here. And I've heard multiple times how much it means that we're present. So we know that the Prime Minister can't be everywhere in all places and at all times. So the fact that we're able to be here and act as a proxy or surrogate just to show the Canada and Nova Scotia's support for the Chinese people here, I think that goes a long way. Also, as a provincial representative, we're a little closer to the action. We're a little closer to the companies that deal regularly with Chinese importers. So we receive a lot of feedback, and we've talked a lot today about recalibration and optimism. The Prime Minister Carney's government has given us pause for recalibration and a renewed sense of optimism. And I would say that our province's relationship with this federal government is incredibly positive. Premier Houston speaks very highly of Prime Minister Carney, and I know that we're all focused on the same thing, and that's right now that's economic development for our company, or pardon me, for our country, and we know that Chinese importers play a big role in that.
Arnold, we spoke earlier of the size of the opportunity represented by the Chinese market for Canadian meat, Canadian pork. What are some of the barriers or obstacles, regulatory or otherwise, that you would like to see action taken on by governments in Canada and China? What are some of the opportunities that industry and government can partner on to ease the flow of Canadian meat to China?
Well, right now there's an obvious one in terms of the 25% tariff that's in place on Canadian pork products, but we know that will eventually. Well, we hope that will be taken care of. But I think in general the cooperation has been good, and I see opportunity going forward just to become more efficient in the system as a whole. Even in things like inspection, we are, there's different things being tested with respect to artificial intelligence, which allow us to maybe do inspection using the latest and greatest technological means, which can in some ways be more efficient and also free up valuable human resources for other things. One of the big opportunities that we see in China going forward is the ability to export fresh chilled meat here. That's something that we've been doing in Asia in other countries in Asia for a number of decades, and the Chinese cold chain system, particularly for fresh products, is continuing to evolve, and we see that as a tremendous opportunity going forward, that we can actually have fresh meat in the market here in the coming years. As I mentioned earlier, there are good relationships from the regulatory perspective, and we just want to continue to build on those to get as much efficiency into the system as possible, which ultimately reduces costs for everyone and allows the opportunity to grow even further.
Greg, pulses are a big part of food inputs, and what's the strategy to better integrate Canadian pulses into the food chain here in China, and also to create potential moats around that business or barriers to entry for other potential suppliers of pulse? And how important is research and research partnerships and investments in those to scale that innovation?
That's a very good question, and I alluded to the fact earlier that we need to transition from the commodity supplier to the ingredient supplier. So I think key to answering that question is, what are we prepared to do differently as our relationship with our customers here starts to mature? And we're starting to gain a fuller appreciation for what that will look like going ahead. So we will always sell them, you know, a bulk vessel of peas, but I think we have to think differently about now what is in those peas. So as an ingredient supplier, we have to take more seriously the breeding program that considers, you know, the inherent characteristics and attributes of peas and how they perform in different end-use applications. I referred earlier to the fact that we began as a commodity supplier to the developing world. Well, to be quite honest, in that game, when you're looking at what works on farm, you're focused primarily on yield. There are a number of different factors, but farmers focus first from a profitability perspective on bushels in the bin. So from a research perspective, you're focused on that as an outcome. Now, as you imagine yourself as an ingredient supplier to a sophisticated food industry, you have to start taking feedback from that food industry and incorporating it into your breeding programs so that you're doing more than focusing on yield. You're starting to look at and investigate the different attributes of your product and how they will perform and outperform other origins in certain end-use applications. We also have to start looking downstream as well and integrate parts of our value stream into the Chinese value stream so that we can look at how they can optimize processing to accommodate the variability that's inherent in our product. Our product is grown in different production regions across Canada, and growing conditions vary year to year, so there will be variability. We have expertise in Canada that we can bring to China to work in collaboration and partnership with our customers as well as with the research community to investigate how we can optimize processing to deal with that inherent variability that occurs within our raw ingredients. All of the stuff that I'm talking about here represents a shift from providing a commodity and leaving it at that to one where we're an ingredient supplier who's prepared to partner with our customers to maximize the potential for the products that they produce and for the customers that they serve on the other end. And to your question around building a moat, when we do this, we will outcompete other origins. Because it's not just about the quality of the product, which we will improve over time, but it's about the quality of service that we provide. And I'll share just one quick little story on that with you on that. We've continued to do this work, the work that I'm talking about in terms of collaboration with our customers, focusing on overcoming technical challenges and processing over the course of this year. In fact, we've met with our customers more often this year, while we're subject to 100% duty and not shipping a single ton here, than we have in recent years. And that's because we've committed to this partnership. This is a bit of a detour. We will get back on track. And as we've continued to work with them, we've attended events in China, we've attended events together overseas, we've invited them to come to Canada to learn from us in Canada as well. And at one particular dinner that I was at in July, I was sitting at a table with representatives from the Australian industry, from the Russian industry, and from the Canadian industry. And one of our buyers stood up and pointed to the fact that, look, we're here, you know, you are all competitors, and I'm purchasing product from all of you. And some of you I'm purchasing from for the first time, because historically I've purchased Canadian product. But I want you to know that you can't touch what the Canadians provide in the way of technical support. And I came back to my staff in Canada and I said that statement alone from one of the biggest buyers here in China is what we're striving to achieve day in and day out. Competing on the basis of commodity sales is a race to the bottom. There's increasing production out of the Black Sea region, and they are going to produce a low-quality product at a low price. And if that's all we have in the way of if that's all we bring to the table is a lower price, we're going to get out-competed in that market. So we have to bring something more. We want our customers to stand up in front of the competition and say, you can't touch Canada when it comes to the support that they provide.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd just like to jump in on this if that's okay, because I really want to build on what Greg said, using Saskatchewan's pulse industry as an example for what Greg's talking about. Saskatchewan's a big little place, right? 47% of Canada's farmland. But when you think about the way we approach innovation, as Greg has described, you know, the pulse story in our province started back in the 1980s with the University of Saskatchewan looking to diversify and create new crops and opportunities for producers. But today you fast forward and you think about the innovation ecosystem and the feedback loop that we've created. We're more responsive, I think, than any other agriculture sectors anywhere in the world. It's a very unique agriculture innovation ecosystem where we've got plant breeders dealing directly in the public sector and the private sector with agronomy researchers who talk every day to farmers, who fund a lot of the research work that we're doing. They're talking to processors who are talking to exporters, who are talking to customers, and Greg bringing that information right full circle back to our breeders around what is new innovation that we need in the pulse sector to meet the needs of consumers around the world. That innovation ecosystem that we have in Saskatchewan to support the growth and the work that Pulse Canada does in the pulse sector is pretty unique, and it makes us highly responsive and highly attuned to customer needs and making sure that we're evolving in the long term for what those needs are.
Yes.
Interesting. I would say the same thing for the meat industry in terms of our willingness to adapt to the needs of the market. Canada is, say, one of the 3 best places in the world to raise pork. But what separates us from some of our other competitors is that willingness to work closely with the customers to meet their needs, and simply not to say, here's what we've got, do you want it or not? It's here's what we've got right now, but how can we adapt it to meet your needs in a better way? And it's interesting to hear that that goes from the full chain, from the feed through to the livestock and the meat products as well.
The importance of relationships and people-to-people and business-to-business relationships is something that I think can't be overstated. When governments, and you know, I was here in the November of 2018 with Minister Morneau and the late Jim Carr, and the discussions at that time between our governments, this is a matter of public record, there were discussions on some sectoral free trade agreements, including one on food as an example, and it was only a few weeks later in December of that year that events changed that trajectory, and we went from a really constructive conversation and discussion to a challenged period that lasted several years. But when governments are at odds, there's still an opportunity for business and people, and in some cases provinces, to keep relationships going. How important do you know, if you're giving advice to people who perhaps have not spent a lot of time in China, how important is it, that commitment to long-term people-to-people relations, to establishing the foundation of trust and good business for all Canadian food producers?
I'll start, sure. I think you're spot on, Minister, that the fundamentals behind any good commerce and good trade is the relationships of the people that are doing the one-on-ones. Was certainly heard that firsthand from every single company that we met with at the China Fisheries and Seafood Show. And it was also interesting to hear that of the 10 or 12 companies that we met with, I would say a good number of those had representatives that had visited Nova Scotia. And the positive feedback that we heard from those folks who had visited Nova Scotia, it warms your heart as a Blue Noser to know that folks from diverse parts of the world, and including China, are coming to Nova Scotia to do business and coming back and with really solid takeaways of emotional responses of how that they felt welcomed, they felt loved, they felt that it was just a beautiful place in the world. And obviously, the relationships behind that are key to good business. I'll leave it there and allow my colleagues here to chime in if they'd like.
Yeah, thanks. I'll maybe give a tangible example of how critically important we think relationships are. And I talked in my opening comments about the federal government setting the framework around free trade agreements and creating the environment for us to be successful, but then it's upon us as a province to execute on that. So as a government, we've taken the strategy of opening 9 international trade offices around the world, and because we have to make sure that the interests of Saskatchewan are being carried forward. And so some of the things that we've talked about today, or that I've talked about today around the commodities that we produce and the sustainability of our ingredients, to communicate that and to really leverage that takes time. It takes market knowledge and it takes relationships. And so that's why we've created our 9 international offices. We've been here in China for a long time with a provincial presence in Saskatchewan because we know how critical the market is. We've got Ha and Michelle and Ivani here today working out of Asia-based offices, both in Beijing and Shanghai. It's really critical for us because at the end of the day, sure, it's businesses, but there's a lot of relationship components, and we have to be able to communicate our value proposition. It's not always easy. It takes time.
Arnold?
Yeah, so from the meat industry perspective, it's a similar story. The relationships are critical. Canada Pork has had an office in Shanghai for many years that facilitates a lot of the commercial work that happens over here. And just this past week, we were pleased to have our Canadian Meat Advocacy Office here in Beijing be opened by Minister MacDonald. And that office is a witness to the commitment of the Canadian meat industry to continue to build relationships and to work more closely on an industry basis with government here in Beijing. On top of this too, I mean, there's other opportunities where we strengthen those relationships. I was mentioning to Scott this morning that we participate in international food shows with Canada Pork, and we meet our customers from around the world at those shows. The most recent one was Anuga in Germany just a few weeks ago, where many of our Chinese partners came to see us as part of the Canada Pork delegation. So those relationships are critical ongoing, and we've also had times when for various reasons we've been out of the market, but that hasn't stopped us from coming to visit and to maintain those relationships because we know that inevitably markets will open up again. They ebb and flow over time, but the relationships actually supersede those short-term situations, and we maintain them for the long haul.
Thanks, Arnold. Greg, and then I'll come back to you.
Yeah, relationships are absolutely critical. We do business with people that we like and trust, and we build that trust over time. In our industry, some of the same suppliers that first started shipping small quantities of peas to China in the mid-1990s are still doing business with them today. I can go into offices that in the company's headquarters here that we've known for many years and still see photos of them on the wall from programs they've participated in Canada and delegations that have visited from Canada to their facilities. So the relationships are long-standing, they're strong, and we're going to get through this blip right now because of that. I think the other plug that I'm going to put in here, and for those who know me, they've heard this story before, but Canada has a big presence here in China. We have a big presence around the world that we don't fully appreciate and we don't fully leverage. The Saskatchewan government, as Bill has just alluded to, has a presence here, has an office here, have staff on the ground here. The Alberta government has people here. Canada Meat Council now has an advocacy office here. Our organizations work with locally engaged people on the ground here. There's the Canada-China Business Council. Our companies have local representatives on the ground here. One thing we don't do very well today is bring those groups together in a full Team Canada approach. And I think as we look ahead, the question for all of us to answer is, what are we doing to align ourselves and to pull in the same direction more effectively? Because we can transform that somewhat piecemeal approach that we take as individual commodity groups and individual entities and transform it into a really strong Canadian presence here if we're working from a common playbook. I know that's not easy. It's easier said than done. But it's something that we should invest into because, you know, often we'll apologize for the Canadian presence and suggest that it's just never going to amount to what the Americans can do in China and other countries around the world. But if you take the groups that I just listed and imagined what's possible if those groups were working together more effectively, I think we could have a much stronger presence that's actually in touch with the market on a more frequent basis, and again, working off a common playbook.
Thanks, Greg. Minister.
Relationships are incredibly important, and I've jeopardized my relationship with my team because I forgot to mention something very important. My province of Nova Scotia, the former premier, signed a memorandum of understanding with the Fijian province about 5 or 6 years ago, and I forgot to note that in my initial answer, and I just wanted to make sure that I highlighted that to show that there is an incredible importance between our province's relationship with Fijian province. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to get that on the record.
And also goes to show that Nova Scotia governments of different stripes are always at some level, they may work like hell against each other during elections, but between elections, they're all fighting for Nova Scotia, and that I would hope that, and it's reassuring to see you here and to understand Premier Houston's continued commitment and the government. Government's changed, but Premier McNeil's innovation in terms of the Chinese market is I think, a good one, and I'm heartened as a citizen of Nova Scotia to see that your government continues to pursue that. That's great, Minister.
Thank you, appreciate that. And you're right, Minister. So we did not export very much seafood to Nova Scotia, to China 10 years ago. And because of the efforts of former Premier McNeil and the investment and the recognition of what a solid market it could be for our seafood, we've grown to over $600 million, $700 million worth of exports from our province to this country.
Great. Look, Greg, when you were speaking, in fact, all of you spoke to ideas for greater cooperation. And back in 1994, Prime Minister Chrétien did the first Team Canada mission. Hard to believe it's been that many years, but it was a large delegation, I think over 300 people, CEOs, university presidents, premiers, all traveled together to China, and then there were Team Canada missions to different parts of the world. Fast forward to 2025, President Trump has given us a bit of a wake-up call, and we're not as complacent now, either in terms of getting big projects done in Canada, improving our productivity and competitiveness, but also diversifying markets. As a country that has more free trade agreements with other countries than any other country in the world, Canada, we may still have been a little bit complacent as to how we have built actual business or capitalized on those free trade agreements. Do you folks, individually, I'd be interested in your perspective, think that an updated model of the Team Canada missions that were very successful in the 1990s, but an updated model, bringing together provincial and federal leaders, along with corporate leaders, to go in force, whether it's in China, other parts of Asia, the Mideast, Europe. Do you think that this is something we should revisit today, and that Prime Minister Carney and his government, Minister MacDonald, isn't, I don't know if he's still here or not, but I raised it in a conversation yesterday. But what would you think? You're in the wheelhouse of this stuff. Do you think this is something that we ought to pursue?
I'll take the first crack at it, and I'll give you the perspective, just one industry's perspective on what a modernization of that model could look like. we believe we have a very impressive plant-based food ecosystem in Canada. So from industry to academia to government, there are professionals across this country that have a lot of expertise and knowledge that can be brought to bear, not just on Canadian opportunities, but on relationships and opportunities and addressing challenges in the international marketplace as well. One of the challenges with the current ecosystem is it's disjointed and the experts are located across multiple locations in Canada, and there's no easy way to access that network of professionals. Now, I got to give some credit to Bill and the government of Saskatchewan. You've really harnessed the energy of the Global Institute for Food Security and Protein Industries Canada and the Saskatchewan Food Development Centre and other institutions within Saskatchewan and brought them internationally to promote opportunities and to help foreign companies address challenges. But there are experts outside of Saskatchewan as well that we could engage to support Team Canada. There's an aroma and flavor specialist at the St. Boniface Research Centre in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and he's a leading authority on this globally. So I guess the point that I would make is part of the modernization of that concept that you're talking about is forming what we would call a distributed network within that Canadian ecosystem, so that these institutions do exist in Alberta and Saskatchewan and Manitoba and Ontario and across the Eastern Canada as well. But creating a virtual network, almost like the Silicon Valley concept. So a distributed network with nodes across Canada that are linked more formally. We as one organization are signing what we call ecosystem agreements with each one of these institutions, one at a time, so that we can offer our customers access to that network. But this is a whole of Canada approach. We need provincial governments and federal government, industry and academia to get on board with that concept as well.
So you're saying a Team Canada within Canada?
Yes. I would say that our Canadian meat industry has already really very much taken on this approach. And I think part of it is that our plants, 95% of the Canadian industry is federally regulated, and so we already think on that federal basis. And we've been exporting a lot of product to a lot of countries for many years. So I think we already, as an industry, capture that Team Canada approach. Even this week we've got various meat companies that are along on this CCBC trade mission. We work together for these international trade shows. I think the opportunity is just to have a larger, if you want to call it, political component to these missions, because when the government steps out and you have the Prime Minister, you have senior ministers coming in support of industry and going out together to further enhance and to show their support for these industry sectors. I think that that's extremely valuable. And even having the minister here today, having him open up the office here in Beijing this week, I mean, it demonstrates to our partners that the industry isn't going it alone. That the Canadian government is highly supportive of this sector and the various sectors, and is there to backstop and make sure that we have opportunities open to us and continue to evolve and develop them.
Yeah, I think the quick answer to your question is yes, but you had a really important word in the preface to your question, which is an updated model, right? The world has changed immeasurably since 1994. What we have to offer as a province and a country is extremely different in terms of how much our agri-food sector has advanced since then. I think the needs of our customers around the world have changed considerably since then. And when I talked about kind of relationships and the messaging and the things that we're trading on, those require different messages, longer-term relationships, and new approaches. So I would say the answer to your question is yes, but updated is a really critical element, and we have to think about how we do that in Canada, because it's not enough to go and say, here's Canada, this is what we have to offer, and I think it was Greg who kind of hit on that. This is how can we become a strategic partner. This is the specific things we have to offer in terms of what are your needs in your export markets.
And Minister, you have, your government has, and the provincial government has worked quite a lot in terms of representing Nova Scotia and Nova Scotia industry here in China. How beneficial is it when that is combined with a federal government partner present and active? To what extent does that make a difference, and what do you think of this Team Canada approach?
Thank you again, Minister. It's incredibly impactful to have a federal minister join me when we're on a mission. This is probably the third visit to a nation where I've had a federal minister lead the mission, and you just notice that everything gets a little bit more attention. Right? There's a little bit more spotlight on everything when there's a federal minister present as well. But I will say we've had some great success traveling with other provinces as well. So last month we did a mission with the province of Prince Edward Island. So good Nova Scotian and Prince Edward Island representation here. Premier Lance and two of his cabinet ministers. We were in Seoul and then in Tokyo and Osaka. And that was incredibly rewarding for us. Lots of great feedback. What I would say about a renewed look at a Team Canada approach is that it would be great to have federal ministers go to countries, great for provincial ministers to go and visit and break down those introductory meetings. But what's really vital is revisiting the country. So, for example, we went to Singapore and Kuala Lumpur on that previous mission, and we know that we can't just go there once and expect to sell more product. We need to make sure that there's a plan to return, a plan to stay connected with those companies that we met, no different than how the Chinese market was started by our province. It was continued revisitation from Premier McNeil and our marketing team, so I think that's the key takeaway for me.
And this panel, of course, is sponsored by Export Development Canada, and they are a strong partner. And Alison, Nankivell, thank you very much for your support of Canadian business. And are the EDC in the presence of EDC, in the partnership of EDC, reflect on it, please, in terms of what you see from your industries and members, the importance of having a strong export development bank to seizing the global opportunities that Canada has. I'd just be interested from each of you.
Incredibly important. We're operating in a very challenging environment, particularly for the pulse industry. Appreciate EDC's willingness to support this industry and to continue to support its efforts to diversify into markets that are going to be challenging as well. So that type of support from EDC is a critical underpinning to the success of the Canadian pulse industry.
Agreed. It's risky to leave Canada as a processor, as a company, as a manufacturer, and we all look to mitigate risk in the best way that we can. And Export Development Canada is an important piece of that, of giving us the confidence that we can go forward and we can do business internationally, and that we have that risk coverage that allows us to be confident as we go forward. So it's extremely important to underpinning the export sector.
Yeah, I would just maybe build on the risk management piece. And so I think about the evolution of what we're going through in Saskatchewan agriculture, and Greg's talked about it, kind of moving from commodity agriculture to ingredient manufacturing, and the fact that opens up new markets. Anytime that we can have a strong export partner with brand recognition in other places that can help mitigate that risk, because this is extremely challenging markets to enter into, and it's capital intensive. So anything that we can do to help manage that risk is a critically important piece for our processors and exporters.
Of course, I'll echo the comments from my colleagues here. EDC is an incredibly important partner for Canadian companies and Nova Scotian companies, and we're lucky to have them.
Well, look, I'd like to wrap up. First of all, I want to thank each of you for really great insights into the challenges and opportunities we have in Canadian food and the partnership with China. I want to thank both EDC for their support and CCBC for, through thick and thin, during times of great harvest and drought in the Canada-China relationship, it is really important to have maintained that strong backbone to continue the dialogue and to, in fact, deepen in some ways the partnerships. I'll leave you with one last thought. Back in 2018, when the relationship took a nosedive, government-to-government relationships, it was about the same time that Jameson nutraceuticals or Jameson vitamins, food supplements entered, or rather put a big push on to grow in China. Their timing may not have seemed impeccable geopolitically, but they had remarkable success as a nutraceutical company, a food supplement company, and another unrelated to food, but Canada Goose opened up their first store in, I think, December of 2018, again, not august geopolitical timing, but had remarkable success. So if that kind of success can happen during a drought of the government relationship, holy cow, hang on, we're going to be in for some great times as we finally get it right, government to government. I wish all of you and your sectors and jobs, you represent important ones right across Canada. I wish all of you continued success, and thank you ever so much for joining us today.